Okay.
Do it. Do it.
All right. Greetings. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Terror Prime Live. I'm Darth Anonymous coming to you from Terror Prime headquarters. Joining me today on the program, we have our friend Craig Page and the General himself, Damon Honeycutt. How's it going, guys?
Great. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. So today we are going to continue our talks about the forms, and we are on now the fourth form, Ataru, and Ataru, the aggression form, the form of both Yoda and Qui Gonn Jinn. We'll talk about that here a little bit. It's also, I guess, together with Soresu, um, is probably one of the forms that is most tied to force powers, other than, say, I don't know, Neiman or something like that. But so we see a lot of ideas because of the Yoda scene um, in Attack of the Clones of lots of force assist type of attacks and that kind of thing. So it's a really good example of how you can take fantasy elements from these forms and bring them into a kind of reality base. We'll kind of go through like what Ataru means canon wise and all that kind of stuff, but this was one of the first forms that I started applying a lot of stuff to in this way, from like human movement science and stuff. So when we get to that, I'll talk more about that. But so canon wise, we'll swing over to you, Craig. What is Ataru according to what's written out there? I suppose, you know, giving relative weight to things, depending on what source they are, video games and all that kind of thing.
So Ataru is the fourth of seven ish lightsaber forms developed before Palpatine's Empire. Ataru was developed roughly around the times of the Mandalorian conflicts with the Jedi, and it was developed kind of in response to that, along with Soresu. It is depicted as being I guess the best word is hyperkinetic, fast-paced, machine gun bursting action. The idea is to intercept the opponent before they are able to react, to overwhelm them with blows and strikes from various different angles. Especially because I reread this. I reread my notes on Ataru before the show, especially considering what we now know of Mandalorians. If that was developed around that time, it's absolutely, we're going to hit them fast and hard before they even pull the trigger, is that level of thinking for how it was developed. Very intercepting Saber. It's two of the main practitioners that we know from the movies are, of course, Yoda, aided and embedded by CGI, and Qui Gonn Jinn by the 6 foot plus Liam Neeson. So variations on how it's depicted very wildly.
Well, and that brings a really good, the first big point, right, is the way that it's portrayed, or the way it was portrayed, in different things, brings up some contradictions.
Yes.
You have Yoda, who's jumping around like a gummy bear on meth, and we've got Qui Gonn Jinn, who's lumbering around like a like a tree, so how do we reconcile these two things, even kind of narratively? And that's a good, that's where I kind of like latched onto with this particular form because, you know, it is really crazy.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to say, okay, this is like acrobatics. So wushu, you know, doing stuff like that, like, and opera stuff like you do, Damon, right? Lots of the tumbling stuff. And I took a lot of the ideas from an art called Ditang, which is groundwork in Chinese martial arts. And in Ditang, and you know this because you practice it too, you've basically got three different types of rotation, right? You have your roll, you have your somersault, and then you have your like a tornado kick where you like you're jumping up and, you know, and doing this, and then you're combining all this. And the point of those things is that you are throwing your entire body into those movements, right? So when you do a cartwheel, you're taking your entire body, your entire body weight, and using that momentum to spin you through a cartwheel. If you can do an aerial, even better, right? You got that. And these then led very directly to the physical ways that we create power in our body, right? Through, you know, hip hinging and through all of these little metabolic things. But the way they present is like jumping, right? A perfect example of that is a serve in tennis, right? They throw the ball up and then they jump to get over the ball so that gravity and their falling body all aid in creating power in that's going to go into that ball and go over, you know, there. The rotation, any type of swinging like a bat, you know, you're trying to get that rotation, you know, and so on and so forth. So that problem actually offered me the solution that I took, which is like, okay, well, how do you do, you know, yoda and this? How can they be doing the same thing? And the thing is that it is because of their size, right? If you're little and you want to create that amount of power, you have to leave the ground. You have to throw your whole body into it. And if you have the force, you can force assist it in that way, right? And if you're really big, you don't have to do that. In fact, you're probably going to want to keep everything kind of real tight because you don't move really that fast, you know.
So then maybe we have the best of both worlds with Maul.
Right.
Yeah, you know, not that he had the classic Ataru Jedi training. I mean, who really knows? But, you know, it's Ray Park as an actor. I mean, he's like 5'10" or something, or 5'8". I can't remember his size, but okay. He's equal proportioned. He's flipping around. He has all those great aerial moves. And, you know, he has a lot of torque in his technique. It's amazing. It's great.
And then again, you also have actors like Sammo Hung who defy body type, you know.
Right.
So, you know, you'd say, well, which style would Sammo Hung want to? He'd do Qui Gonn Jinn, but nope, he's a Yoda. Yeah, yeah. If you don't know who Sammo Hung is, go ahead and Google him on YouTube and check out some fun scenes. He's one of the best. Anyway, so yeah, so that's where we were coming to it. Right. We've got that thing. And then, of course, we have the force powers, and we don't actually have force powers idea. So how do we go about, how do you think about that, Damon? When you're thinking
about force powers?
Well, about like taking things like force powers and translating them into something that is, you know,
well, you know, real. I mean, isn't it in the Book of Five Rings where Musashi says if you train like thoroughly to the common person, you will have miraculous abilities or like unapproachable abilities? So that's kind of like how I look at it. Like a butterfly kick to someone who is, and just like your straight up butterfly kick, you know, or even a roll to someone who is like untrained or a neophyte is simply amazing.
Yes.
And it is, you know, I mean, unless they're, you know, one of the armchair kind of sifus that just, you know, armchair sifu would just be like, well, that rolls like, you know, that's different. That's just a critical person, you know. But when you do people who don't train, or they see something, because it's, you know, if you look at like, you know, Jedi as like Kshatriya or warrior class, you know, I mean, merchants are going to be like, whoa, check that, whoa, you know. So that's how I think about it. And then that becomes internal as I get older. It's like, you know, I still got a butterfly kick in me, but not like how I did when I was training with Teacher Chi or Hujin Chan, you know. Right. However, I have it to show my kids it, but some of my kids are getting, whoa, they're getting really good at it. And I'm like, wow, okay, so they got that young, I don't know, young force. My older force is more, it's internal. So my idea of force powers in my older age is to be incredibly rooted or immobile or strong or you know, wedging in or springing a lot of you know, springing power and explosive force, you know, much of how Craig, you're talking about like attacking from different angles. That doesn't mean you have to jump everywhere, but you know, to have explosive force from different angles, I think is also a great way to think about it.
Well, it becomes something almost like it's like a chess master has, you know, developed enough experience that he's going to be able to think steps ahead of whatever, you know, a neophyte would be thinking. So it would, you know, so it's like, all right, I'm going to, you know, strike here. And then you're, you know, and basically doing the math in their head. And, you know, it's using all their experience to keep the principle the same while also, but changing the application.
And I think there's a real world analogy here too with something from Chinese martial arts, Qinggong, or lightness skill, which people see represented in the movies as people flying around and fighting on treetops and grass.
And the great, well-known crouching tiger, hidden dragon running up the walls.
Yes.
You've been trained at Wudang.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff. Now, the thing is that what Qinggong is an actual martial art technique, but it's really a technique that's attributed to people. People would see people with amazing acrobatic skill and they go, these people can fly, right? They can
like
jump.
The famous ninja Sarutobi, I think, jumping monkey. That was the first like Japanese ninja warrior thing, was called Sarutobi, if I remember right, when they named it after that famous ninja who they called jumping monkey, if memory serves. And it's just like, he must have just, or parkour, like those parkour cats, dude, like David Bell. Oh, that's
well, the Olympics is right now. Just watch the floor gymnastics, right? These people are on flat ground and they're vaulting themselves up 12 feet in the air.
Granted, they're on a sprung floor to save their joints, but yeah.
Yeah, but I challenge anybody to do that just off the street. Just go on that springing floor and see if you can. I know. See if you can even jump over like like two buckets.
Actually, that's a really good example, actually, because you mentioned parkour and gymnastics. God, this must have been like 10 years ago, but I saw a guy do a Saber form, just like a demo using capoeira, and just the angles he was hitting, like able to work off of, was beautiful. And I think that's the trick, is that you need to have a very intimate understanding of body mechanics, especially your own personal body mechanics.
Yeah.
You know,
capoeira has really very interesting angles, you know, and it's beautiful and flowing and yeah.
And we can talk about this even, you know, more as we go on too, but things like capoeira, things like wushu and all that kind of thing, and we'll be getting into that. It's like, what is real martial art and what is, you know, this, that, or the other. And you got to remember, there's all these different types of combat. You have what most people think of when they say a real fight now is like an MMA fight or a ring fight where you got two people and they're going at it.
But that's organized combat.
Exactly.
We talked about in a ring. And that's the thing too. Unreal. I mean, that's going to hurt.
Right. But that's the thing. So much of what we consider real combat is highly ritualized, right? There's rules. There's like, even in the old Victorian duels or whatever, you had lots of rules of engagement that you had to kind of go through. Capoeira is a perfect example of that,
Oh, there's
right?
tons of beautiful rituals in that art.
Yeah, I mean that thing is a really good expression of a ritualized sumo as well as a ritualized style of fighting. Now, could a person doing one of those arts defend themselves in a barroom brawl? Right. Well, that depends on how they've trained throughout their lives. If they've done a little bit of sparring, I'm sure they could tear the place apart. You know, if they haven't, maybe they won't. I don't know. It'll be left up to chance. But um, when we're talking, we're going to be talking about Ataru, which is going to involve a lot of gymnastics. And what is the good of learning how to do a tornado kick, learning how to do a flip or a roll, or a cartwheel?
Well, if we start
Why?
from the ground up, learning how to roll is super important. If you don't know how to roll, you're just silly. Because if you trip and you just, all you know how to do is go, you're a great martial artist, you can punch through whatever and you can have all these great stances. But if you trip on something, go on your face,
Yeah, right.
like, come on. Like when I was learning Dance Ataru Jiu-Jitsu, like ukemi, 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 ukemi for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
All I did was roll and get thrown.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my buddy, when we used to teach our fighting class, we would constantly say, "Look, we're old. Our fighting days are over, but our falling days have just begun." So definitely learning how to fall.
And in
Right.
parkour, those people roll. I mean, look at how much they fold into themselves and roll when they do those outrageous jumps or techniques or vaults or window escapes or whatever. And when I'm teaching my, ninja kids in the program, I mean, the whole first 20 minutes of class and warm-ups is stances and rolls and basic movements like cartwheels and long jumps and turning jumps, like every class, no matter what level.
Yeah.
And it saves that.
Yeah, a lot of people will say, I can't, you'll show them this like really fancy form. Go, I could never do that form because I can't do a front flip or I can't do this flip. I go, can you do a somersault? Yeah. Then you can do this form. Instead of doing the front flip, do a somersault, right? Do a roll. And when you were saying that to normal people, this look, when I was like going around with the little wushu troupe and like performing for like, Chinese schools and all this, I'm a big, tall, white guy. Anytime I did the simplest acrobatic trick, the audience went nuts, right? Like just a roll. Oh, yay. So, just because what impresses you can't necessarily do. You can't think of it that way, when you're trying to perform, that is. But, Damon can probably talk more about the performance aspect of that.
When it comes to strength, I mean, because where I teach at is a gymnastics school, so they have a competitive team. And I'm telling you, those gymnastics kids are stronger than heck and faster than heck. And they're hanging from things all the time, doing the what are the dual bars, a high and low bar that the girls do. You got to have a high level of dexterity and strength to do all of those kind of things. And so why learn that? I mean, holding a handstand for just chilling out for like a minute without a wall, I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it aligns your body in a different way and just makes you strong. I mean, if you think about the history of yoga, I mean, yoga looks a lot that way because, oh man, I don't have my history right. I should have wrote this down. It went a lot of things were back at the turn of the last century, if memory serves, were very influenced by gymnastics, the aesthetic of it, in working in a line and these types of things, the postures of it, the asana of it. And was it Krishnamacharya who did that? Oh man. Anyways, cross-fertilizing traditions where you take looking at gymnastics and the strengths and the line and the beauty of it, and it's a dynamic strength. It's not just like, I'm going to just, get my arms the size of my head, which is cool too. I mean, people are really strong that way, and I dig it. However, what I really like about parkour athletes and gymnastic athletes and capoeiristas is that their strength is integrated with their dexterity. It's not a separate thing, and it's a dexterity that is in the flow, not an explosive dexterity that's responsive, like you see in a lot of, you can say, combative arts, or like, I think Wing Chun's a great example of that. It's so responsive. It's very fast twitch, when they're chi sows. I mean, that is dexterity and timing too, but of a different type. Yeah. And so that's kind of just my thoughts on it. And both of those, I think, are very miraculous powers, you could say, force powers in that way.
Well, yeah, if we take the conceptual force and look at what we call force, then what we're really talking about is we're talking about full body power, full body coordination, and acrobatics and jumping, and all of that is one of the best ways to train that, to really train the strength of it by yourself.
A really great video sorry to interrupt, Chad, but a really great video is like, there's a gymnast and a bodybuilder on a trampoline. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen that video? Where they were, so it's like there's a gymnast on the trampoline doing things, and the bodybuilder comes and he's really strong, and you could probably pick the gymnast up and throw him 20 feet. Right. However, when he gets on the trampoline, he just doesn't know how to jump because his strength is of a different type. It's not integrated the way the gymnast is. Right. And so it's just really interesting to watch.
Yes. Now, so you can see that. So like a butterfly kick, one of the things that I tell people to train a butterfly kick for is hip throws. The action that you're doing with a butterfly kick is essentially what you do in a hip throw.
Or even a counter to a hip throw. I don't know if you've seen Man of Tai Chi.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Man of Tai Chi, where that Tiger Chen comes into it's Yu Hoi, right? The old master, right? Who's the master in that. And he goes in for like a throw. I think it's like straight up, like almost like a Judo Seo Inagi looking thing. And he counters it in the choreography with a butterfly kick by checking his hip. And I think like, wow, that was really cool. That was innovative.
That's a real Shuijiao reversal, right? I've performed it on people. Like they've come hip throwed me. You basically you use the momentum of their throw
and just go around them.
You use your legs and the butterfly kick to right yourself. When you land, if you don't let go, you will literally have them in a guillotine hold, right? Which is awesome because they think they threw you, and then all of a sudden they're like, "What the heck?" So
and outside of movies aside, with your experience, who was that one guy who used to cartwheel on people all the time? Sakuraba?
Yeah, Sakuraba. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just like, boom, what are you going to do? You've got now 250 pounds on top of you, on top of your chest.
So it's right. As we've said earlier, it's like, how have you trained yourself with what you know?
Right. Exactly. Yep. And so I think we had a question here about conservation of energy and full body stuff. And I think that's really the key right there. When you're using, the whole point of using full body power and full body energy, right, is so that you do not have to expend as much overall effort to accomplish the same amount of work, right? So like a 1-inch punch, right? A 1-inch punch is nothing miraculous. It's basically just a good rhythm between your core and your punch there. And, it's essentially a very, very fast push with the top of your fist, right? And if you're really good at that, it's actually pretty easy to go.
And as I get older, to respond to that individual's question, it's a lot in breath. And when you're younger, you can push through athletically with strength and not be really connected to your breath much at all, and throw your butterfly kick and afterwards be like, you know what I mean? But as you get older, that just, if you don't have a connection with your breath, then you're more, I say flashy techniques or techniques that need that conservation of energy become very, very exhausting very quickly. Yes. And so by having, you know, a pranayama practice, or like what's in Goju-ryu, Sanshin or Sanchim, as they say.
Sanshin,
yeah. Like having that, you know, you look at those old dudes doing those forms and you're like, back to that 1-inch punch thing, you know, like I had the honor of training with Chinen sensei and in Goju. And like when I would watch him, he came for a seminar, and, you know, he was in his early 70s when he was teaching us at the school. And boy, you know that if you took all of that cultivation into one spark movement, just things explode on the other end, you know. And it's beautiful that it becomes that single pointed singularity, but also can be a great expansive sphere.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, you know, these motions are all based. The human being only pretty much has 4 basic strategies of movement, right? We have a lift, we have a squat, we have a push, we have a pull, right? Everything that we do in our motion is based on these 4 fundamental movement patterns, which are in our body. It doesn't matter which one. Now, you have to be trained to take that training and apply it in the ways that you're doing it, right? It's not good. Just because you're really good at butterfly kicks doesn't mean you're immediately good at throwing people. You need to learn how to actually do the throw, but the body mechanics are there, right? And
it was like when I toured as a dancer, and when I was working with Palabolas and we were doing the whole shadow land show and going everywhere, you know, I didn't practice martial arts the same way. I practiced it for myself, you know, but I didn't like really throw like practice forms crazy like I did when I was training with Hu Jin Chong or Paulie. However, still moving and dancing and learning a whole different way of being in my body. When I came back to martial arts, I realized that putting those forms, let's say putting the form or putting the tradition on the shelf for a little bit, or putting it on the back burner to simmer, and refocusing on a completely different way of movement. When I came back and added all that experience to that, wow, it was a huge lesson and a huge leap in understanding about what was in there that couldn't have been unlocked if I didn't do something else.
Yeah, I'm kind of reversed, where I came from a physical performing background and then got into martial arts after that. But I have the same experience when I get injured, because I get injured and then I have to I have to back off of everything, and then I have to build myself back up, incorporating the new, you know, injury and everything like that. And the same thing happens, right? If you get into a different mode in your training, whether you go from, you know, combative to performance, or you're injured, so you have to come off and now you're going from recovery, from building to recovery, these things, these universal things kind of like seep into you, right? You have to be the one to bring them out. But they do, you know, they will be there. And what you're talking about with the breath, the same thing with what Craig was saying about body mechanics. These things, knowing these things, will benefit each other. There's body mechanics involved with breath, because if you don't have your breath matched, and this is very, very important for a lot of people out there, okay? If you can't match your breath and you don't have control over your breath, you don't have control over your core. So I don't care how many push-ups you do, how many core exercises you do, and how strong your core is. If you're not matched with your breath, you can't tap into that power, right? Because that's our mechanism for doing that, right? Why do we make kiais? Why do we grunt? It's to create that pressure, right? And a strong core, right, has to be trained to kind of do that kind of thing.
You look like you're going to say something. What was on your mind?
There's the conversation about breath. I work with a lot of professional wrestlers. What is my life? And there's a term that they have that's just called getting gassed. And that is, you know, I've seen guys do 30, 45-minute matches where they're, working with each other, bouncing off the walls. And all of that, I kid you not, could not be done without good breath control. Like, they build in moments where they can breathe, they build in, and you can tell when something has gone wrong, when, like, you can tell when everything goes right because they just look tired. You can tell when something has gone wrong when, like, 5 minutes in, they are red as a beet and then they are completely gassed out. Breath is key breath is just key. Duh. But especially in a topic like this, it is the key to body mechanics in general. I can do quite a bit for a guy my size. One of my main problems, because I have a breathing problem, is that sometimes I just forget to breathe, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, why do I feel like hammered crap right now? Oh, right, inhale, dumbass. When was the last time you drew in breath? Oh, right, at the beginning of this.
Yeah, people take breathing for granted.
Yeah.
Right?
Until they're underwater.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Well, here's the other point we got to make. It's untrue that we can't breathe underwater. We just can't inhale. Right. So half of the breathing cycle is there, and that's really the secret. When you see these people who are holding their breath for a very, very long time, one of their ways of doing it is they're constantly releasing just a little bit of air, right? So that it doesn't trigger their, oh my gosh, I'm suffocating, reflex or what have you. But matching your breath, like in wrestling, you could see this when you see people doing their choreographies. And I think that people who do choreography could benefit from doing a lot of the stuff that we do because of the breath thing. Because one of the things you can see a lot in choreographies, especially by amateurs and novices, is these extended periods of them circling each other, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, that's really hard to keep moving for that long. Yeah, it's really hard. A 3-minute round is an eternity when you're fighting in any sport. It's a long time.
The same in the music. I mean, if you don't have any rests, and you're just, you're not going to give a breath instrument like a French horn or a trombone or something a bunch of craziness. They got to breathe, and so when you're composing, you just got to know what you're doing.
Yeah, unless you're Charles Mingus, who was a sadist.
Well, it's similar to what I notice in a lot of lightsaber choreography, is that everybody is going and there's no rest stop. There's no and I blame a lot of the movie choreography for that, because again,
there's not a lot of dynamics.
Yeah, you can do a lot with CGI that you can, and editing. But it's like, guys, you are dead in the water by the time your fight is done, and I don't mean that in a good way. I don't, like, you look dead, and I don't mean your characters. Mm-hmm. You and your audience need to breathe and be able to allow yourself time to process, because you're just working. You're like, it's work, and it is, you have to filter and recycle a little bit.
Yeah.
So go ahead. I'm sorry, Chad.
Oh, well, I was going to bring it back to Ataru as well, because when we're talking about, the flurry of things overwhelming another person with that, you have to last longer than them, right? So this is the type of thing, some of those acrobatics, some of all of this, doing a bunch of rolls in the middle of a form. You think doing a form is hard now? Throw a couple of rolls in there, right? Put a thunder god kick where you do a tornado kick, but you land on the ground, right? And then you have to get back up. That takes it out of you. Getting back up off the ground.
Anytime you change level. Yeah. Like if you're just doing form like this, then you know, but as soon as you go like this, then that's a whole, like you said, you have the squat or the lift, or, you know, you're integrating a lot more.
Yeah.
And you gotta build that constitution, that endurance.
Yeah. And breath is the number one thing that you're training there. Because if you don't have your breath right, these things just don't work. You know, you just can't perform them. So like going to the ceiling is an interesting exercise, right? At some point when you're training with us, when you're doing Ataru, we always say slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? But at some point, you have to make the exchange. You have to switch it up, and now you have to go fast, right? Otherwise, you won't be able to go. And then that's where you start integrating all of these things. What were you going to say, Damon?
Oh, that was pretty much it. You know, I think the same thing. It's when you get those tools underneath you, then you got to pressure test them.
Yeah, definitely. And that's another thing too. Like you see, like fights in movies and stuff like that. They do those things where they come into the bind and they're talking, right? You know, a lot of those things are just like, you know, okay, all right, back to it. You know. Anyway.
So also, I think another good reason to teach those acrobatics, another good thing I like to do with the butterfly kick is have them, with my kids, have them butterfly kick over something.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of gives them, and that's harder to do than you think, because you have an odd, you know, just have the ground. It's like as soon as it's like they're all doing precision jumps and it's cool. Then all of a sudden I put a 1.5 foot block to another 1.5 foot block. And then they're like, wow, that's a foot. And that's okay. But then when you get like 6 feet block to 6 feet block, then they realize that, you know, these kids are like 7. So that's, you know, maybe some of them, it's maybe almost twice their body height. And so then it becomes, they've done the jump and it's not that far away, but then there's a different level of testing or pressuring it. Same thing with the butterfly kick over an object. It's like the butterfly kick solid. Then you give them something to kind of put a little snafu in the technique to pressure test it. Then when they go back, they realize the importance of something like that.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Rolling is another good example of that. You start rolling, usually you start from your knees, right? Just doing it next from your feet. That first one is pretty scary. You're looking down at the ground going, whoa, it's a long way down. And then when you start to have to jump over things and go into that roll, that adds just another level of that. And so you build those skills. If you don't have that first roll, you're going to break your neck when you jump over the chair.
Same thing with cartwheels. Like I have them eventually like cartwheel up an angle, like up an incline to build strength, up and then maybe off. So then they get used to like doing aerial stuff or flips or something. You know, I got one kid, he's doing like a crazy gainer. He's very, very skillful and stuff like that. And, but we had to work to get there.
Right. Yeah. So let's see, we've got a question here. How long on average does it take to learn proper breathing technique? Yes. It's just something that you always, you know, you're always going to be working on, right? You can never always have control of your breath. There's always going to be something that's going to happen, right? Because especially in a fight, because you're not alone, you got somebody else. And, you know, sometimes their plan isn't necessarily to hit you right away, but it's to tire you out, right? If they notice you and your breath is a little erratic, or they notice you putting a little too much into it, they may try to punch you out. To get you to gas. Go ahead.
To extend on that, and I had written this in the chats. As someone who has trouble breathing and also has anxiety, breathing techniques are something that it's a tool in your toolbox for the rest of your life, and you just go back to it whenever you need it. whether it's training or you're having, a panic attack. I almost cursed there for a second. I'm trying to cut down. It is not like, it's not something that is mastered. It is just something that you just do over and over and over again to help yourself. And a lot of breathing techniques that I was taught in acting and martial arts actually resemble anxiety reducing breathing techniques in psychology classes. So there's an interesting overlap between the two.
Yeah. Breathing is our one function that is both autonomic and voluntary. And it has this weird effect in that if you are anxious or whatever, and you artificially slow your breath, that takes one piece out of the equation that your physiology is using to create anxiety, which will then kind of disrupt that. So it's literally fake it till you make it, right?
Yeah.
It's literally, I'm going to fool my body into thinking I'm not anxious.
Right. And to tie it all, oh, sorry, Damon.
I was just gonna say that when your breathing technique in an area of stress becomes habitual, like something happens and then you just immediately go to the breath rather than being like, oh, I should have breathed there, maybe. Right. Like when it's habitual, then it's starting to really make a difference.
To sort of tie everything in together on that thought, and I just had this, is that, there's a lot of talk of chi in martial arts. Chi is breath, or at least that's what I was taught. And
originally,
yes. And chi, the concept of chi eventually became part of what became the Force in George Lucas's work. And so, if you want to learn Force techniques, breathe. Breathe first, and the rest will follow.
Yeah, Qigong is literally breath skill.
Yeah.
Just breathing exercises. And but you can. I mean, I'm telling you. So I'm always coming out as somebody who's against sit-ups and flexion-based exercises to increase ab strength, right? But the one thing, if you really want like bulletproof abs, is breathing, right? I mean, if you have good breath and you can do that, right?
Man. I mean, like there's some of those yogic breathing techniques like Kapalabhati or Vastrika, or any of the bandhas where you're doing the locks and working with your abs. My God, like that's a whole different level of abdomen work.
Yeah,
and diaphragm work, really.
Yeah, you've got that. Anytime, again, we are neurologically, our core is what enables us to walk on 2 feet, right? Our breath has to synchronize with that in order to keep us upright.
I mean, let's just think about all the muscles required. I mean, of course, the whole body's required in breath, but just think about it. So you got the diaphragm, you got the abdominal, transverse, rectus, you got intercostal muscles, which most people probably don't really think about too often.
Right. Those are the muscles between the ribs.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there to support what's happening.
Absolutely. All right. We've got somebody else coming in here. That's a good example that when you already have a lot of musculature which is involved in breathing, right? It's the same musculature which is involved in producing power, and for us, our bodies, to take the movement that we're doing and to impart it into an object, right? That's not, I mean, that's a process which is actually very, very difficult, and we are one of the few animals that's really mastered it, right? We very much take that for granted. But as I say, the best example of it is if you're about to push something, like a couch or something like that, you put your hands on it, you get your feet set, You're all ready to push. The first thing you do is right, and you push that pressure down, and that stabilizes your core, and that allows you to push something off. When you're spinning, when you're rolling, when you're cartwheeling, or anything like that, this is taking your core through the 3 dimensions of movement, right? You've got your transverse, you've got your frontal, you've got your sagittal, all of that, right? And you're moving through 3D space, so your core is able to do that, right? When we're talking about the counter to the hip throw, right? Yes, you have to go with the energy of the hip throw, but you also have to have enough strength in order to then, while you are weightless in the air, move yourself to where you want to go and not where they want you to go.
Yeah, you have to go with the momentum, but also have a static space hold. So you have to be in that posture to be allowed to be carried by them, then to reset and then go to the next thing, rather than just torquing it around with your arms or something.
Right. So it's, these, as intimidating as they are, as seemingly useless that they may be, they're actually pretty important exercises, acrobatics, and
they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, they are. And like we said, you don't need to be able to, you don't need to be able to do butterfly twists and everything like that. You do a simple butterfly kick for a bunch of people, or do a roll on some concrete, and yeah.
And just rolling with an object or doing something with an object, that levels it up completely. Like when I was working with my kids, I'm like, okay, everybody, I want you to bring your school backpack to class next week, empty. And I filled it full of foam blocks. And I go okay, now run the obstacle course with your backpack on.
Mm.
And how does that change your window escape? Can you roll with it on your back? Oh no, you have to put it on your front. And so it challenged my more advanced kids to think differently. Because what if they've got to run with their backpack, man? You never know.
Yeah. No, it's true, right? When you train firefighters, right? You train them in gear, right? Here, wear your hot, heavy rubber coat and your helmet and an oxygen tank.
God, geez.
Because that's what you're going to be required to do, and you want them to be able to adapt to that particular setting. So let's see what we got here on questions here. We've got, does Qigong place a heavy emphasis on breath control? Does that practice? So yes, since essentially Qigong is breath control. So yeah.
And there's many different forms of Qigong. I think both Chad and I, we really practice ones that are moving,
yes.
and but there's also ones that are just sitting, very similar to pranayama practices of yoga. And
standing ones as well.
Yeah. But for my personal take of how I mean, my breath and body, I like to put them together. When I go into meditative breath practice, both, yin yang, both are important.
Yep. Definitely. Yes. So there are, of course, Qigong exercises that are specific to weapon work nowadays and all of that. And essentially what these exercises can really be boiled down to are just, basic exercises, conditioning exercises, that kind of thing. The difference is that, and this is probably the overarching point that we're trying to make here, is whatever you're doing, whether it be conventional weights, whether it be, or anything like you're doing to keep your fitness up with your sabering, with your martial arts, you have to integrate breath into it, right? Breath has to be part of your strength training regimen. Even in Western things, I've been a personal trainer for a long time. I was, a post-exercise rehabilitation specialist. And that's the one thing that we constantly teach people how to do is like, you're not just doing this lift, but you're breathing in particular ways with this lift.
Speaking of lifts, check out how power lifters breathe when they're doing their craziness. I mean, my God, that is a lot of weight. And they were just, I mean, talk about ki.
Yeah. Oh. And they're perfect example, because what happens to them is they've basically got a reverse jump. And I bring this guy up all the time, Pocket Hercules. I can't remember his real name. He was
I've never heard of that guy.
Yeah, he was a Greek Olympian, power lifter. He held the record for quite some time, but he was very small. He was like 5 something, and I saw him in a kind of thing, like talking about his different, his strategies and stuff like that. And he was standing next to a stack of tires, right? And he just went whoop and jumped on top of them. It was over his head, and he's just saying this is the motion that we do in powerlifting. The thing is that we have all of that weight on top of us, so it keeps us on the ground. So when that weight's not there, and I just think of it that, I can then translate that into ups.
That's cool. I'm gonna have to check out videos on that dude, Pocket Hercules. Nice.
Yeah, I gotta remember his name here. But
I'm sure if you Google Pocket Hercules, that's enough.
Yes, I'm certain. Yes, Pocket Hercules is definitely.
Well, we got a few more minutes left. Are there any more questions in the chat? I love questions.
Oh, I cannot pronounce his name.
One thing I thought of is between all 3 of us, there's kind of like, I was thinking of this before. It's kind of like all of us kind of were like a firsts in the lightsaber community. Like I myself was the first to put an actual form online. Mm-hmm. Chad, you were first to really create online instruction for it, like taking the forms and breaking them down and getting your own take on it. And Craig, you were, I think, the first to actually create some reference, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool that all 3 of us are finally on a.
That's true. Yeah.
Well, this is the first time we've all been on a vid thing together, and and so that's, that's some. I just was thinking of that, and I thought it'd be nice to point that out to the audience.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good point. I hadn't quite thought about that. Yeah. So, okay, let's see if we have any other questions here. Nothing much to say for questions, but yeah. So like, if you look at our stuff, that's like some of the stuff that I've got, there's two different types of Ataru stuff that we have on our channel. I've got the stuff with the kids, which is all the acrobatic stuff, right? So it's got a butterfly kick in it. It's got a roll. It's got, kick ups, all this stuff, right? If you can't do that, or you're of a more advanced age or whatever, then we also have the more basic, accelerations and stuff that just kind of ease you into these types of movements. They're pretty much, they're pretty applicable to each other if you know what you're doing. We do have one more question here. So which do you think is more fundamental to Ataru, the Suma rotations or the idea of the whole body as a weapon? I would say, at least in our version of it, the way I'm thinking of it is those are 2 of the same things. The Suma rotations are the ways that you build up momentum using your whole body through rotating it through different planes of motion or a combination of them, right? So if I take a regular diagonal slash like that, I'm taking my waist and my hips are using this motion here. My body is kind of stabilizing in this plane, right? And my arms and stuff are kind of going, over there. So you've got a kind of a combination of all of these 3 things, right? But the sumo rotations themselves are the rotations of the whole body, right? Whether you jump with them, whether you hit with them, whether you just move with them, or whether you try to chain stuff together with them, it's up to you. I don't know if anybody wants to.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if I take it, I can't really show, but if I take a motion and I just stop and then I turn, that's very square. But if I use my body and then I stir it a little bit and turn, that keeps it, that helps me. It's like when you're in a car and you're going into a curve and you go on the inside to shoot yourself out, right? Same kind of centripetal force, same use of torque, you know, rather than going, you know, you go and then, you know, it's, you see airplanes, you see birds do it all the time, you know, and I think that's another really good example of doing, watching birds using using the arc of the wind or whatever to move. Or you can look at currents. If you look at currents in a river, you can see how the land is different from the inside to the outside based off the force of the water.
Yeah. And like my friend would often say, Tony, you know, being able to stop is one of the most underrated parts of getting anywhere.
That's hilarious, because in the Mahabharata, Dharma what is the hardest thing to know, and he's like, to know when to stop.
Yeah, I mean, when you're moving and you, especially if you're spinning and stuff like that, to stop yourself directly takes a lot of effort. It's not really, so being able to know how these things connect, that's how you can connect lots of things together, not just ba, 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 but knowing that there are circles and curves that you can follow that are going to allow you to continue that motion, that momentum, your body weight and all of that stuff through these things, and maybe allow you to dissipate them when they need. You can then stop them a little bit more, all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because sometimes, you know, when my kids are trying to learn putting moves together, their speed will override their sense of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that a lot. And you see that a lot when people are starting, like early, like trickers that are just getting into it. They'll go instead of land, they'll like crash and burn, because they build up so much momentum, you know, like people who are really good at tricking, they'll stop on a dime, you know. And so there, I think you're right, Chad, there's a learning curve with like how to put that brake on.
Yeah, and in training in Western sports medicine, we call it eccentric training, right? If you want, sometimes when you're like, let's say you're training a sprinter and they're hitting the wall, you can't get them to get their time down, right? Oftentimes, what some of the high level coaches will do is they'll take them back and say, okay, let's see what your eccentric loads are. Like how is your ability to stop? Right? Because your body will downgrade your performance if it knows that you're going into an area that you cannot control, right? And it will start to pull you back. And so oftentimes focusing on the eccentric, the part where the muscle is being loaded, but it is also elongating, right? Rather than shortening. That phase is very, very important. It's very integral to the whole Ataru thing, right? You can create a lot of control that way.
One thought I had in this entire, I think this entire hour has kind of hammered a point that I notice in people who tend to take up the saber, is that they tend to think of things only in regards to their saber. This is a very big novice mistake that I find, whether it's choreography, martial arts, whatever. They keep thinking of the disco stick of death as just it is the only, you know, it is the only thing that exists. The body is just holding it, and it's a patent lie. It's, you know, it's, you know, it's a trite saying. Well, not even trite. It's a true statement that the weapon is an extension of your body. It
Right.
It adds an extra joint and action to whatever you are doing. And one of the things that I've taught people or tried to teach people using Shicho that Damon developed, and also the Shicho that Chad developed, is how to get used to your body in relation to the saber that you have, and how to move with it without, hurting yourself, and also getting adjusted to your body, which, goes back to, the TPLA 7 forms, where one builds on the other, builds on the other, builds on the other. You use Shicho to learn your body in relation to the weapon, and then you build up. And which is why if you're having problems in one area, you go back to the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good point. Yep. Most definitely. All right. Well, we are at the end of the hour here. Let's see if we don't have any more questions on the chat. Anything else you guys want to mention before we sign off?
No, I think this was great. This is a great conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it really shows, this is really why we like doing this, right? Because we have this reality thing, right? Our martial arts, our training, or all that kind of thing that we want to impart to people. We also have this fantasy thing that, connects us to all these people. And we love bringing them together and finding new ways of doing this. Now, obviously, this is only our 3 opinions. I'm sure other people will have different, takes on how all this, and that's the great thing about this stuff. There isn't that much actual content set down in stone, so we pretty much have free reign. But this is a good example of what we use and what other people could use in their own projects and stuff like that. Something as crazy as force powers, we can still integrate into some realistic and reasonable way, right? That can still add a lot of fun to everything, And then when you're doing your choreographies and you're doing stuff that's set up, you can then incorporate that stuff and say, well, instead of me just doing a little hop right here or whatever, we'll have wires and I can go, I think the best, not force powers, but at the end of The Mandalorian, the last episode of The Mandalorian, when they were storming the ship, when they first come off the thing, and Bo-Katan and what's her name? I can't remember the character's name. Come in there and take down everybody, and they're using their jetpacks as accelerations for knees, and that's great. Here, take a jetpack assisted knee to the face.
Yeah, you can see why the Jedi needed a form to fight those dudes.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
And especially since their lightsabers don't cut the Beskar.
Yeah. It's time to get it on.
Yeah. So now, that's what we want to see. That's the next movie out there, the next trilogy, the Mandalore Jedi War. Make it happen.
That would be good.
All right. Okay. Well, we are here at the end of everything. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you to Damon and Craig for joining us here today. Thank you, everybody out there, for watching. Patience, practice, perseverance. Happy sabering.
Bye, guys.